Okay, today I'd like to read from John's Gospel in chapter 9, ninth chapter of John's Gospel, and some interesting things to find out about here. John chapter 9 says, "As Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, Neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. And when he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground, and made clay of the spittle, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, Go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. And he went his way, therefore, and washed, and came again seeing." Now I'm going to stop right there and talk about this, but if you're interested, the story goes on for the whole rest of the page here, and it's kind of funny. You know, if anything can be humorous, it is kind of funny, because the man comes back and he can see, and he gets in a big fight with the Pharisees, and they said, well, you can't be the same person. And yes, it is the same person. They call his parents, "Is this your son?" "Yeah, that's your son." "But well, then why does he see now?" "We don't know why he sees now." Anyway, there's all this argument. It's kind of funny to read that. But I just want to go back and talk about what actually happened here. Go back to verse 2. "Now they passed by," we read in verse 1, "and they found this man, who were told he was blind from his birth." Now the disciples, you can tell how people think by what they say. And by what the disciples say reveals what they're thinking. And what they say is, who sinned, this man or his parents, to cause him to be born blind? In their thinking, they're imagining that God is a God of retribution, and that somebody must have sinned here for this misfortune to happen. And so evidently somebody did something wrong, or this wouldn't have been this way. And so God is evidently getting somebody back and giving them retribution. Now what they want to know is who sinned, this man or his parents. And as I say sometimes in commenting on this, I can see how they might think the man, although, or the parents, but this man, he was born this way. I mean, how could he have, what sins could he have committed to cause this? But what Jesus says is interesting. I want you to notice verse 3 when Jesus answers. He says, "Neither hath this man sinned nor his parents." Now he's not implying that this man, the blind man, or his parents, he's not implying that they never committed a sin. He's not implying that they're perfect. He's not implying that they are the one rare example of a perfect, sinless person. That's not what he means. What he's saying is it's got nothing to do with it. He says, you're assuming some things that aren't true. They were assuming that somebody did something wrong, or this misfortune would not have happened. And he's basically refusing to engage in that. He's not going to look back at why it happened. He just bypasses that, because really, the truth of it is, it doesn't really matter. And when he says, "Neither hath this man sinned nor his parents," he's saying that's got nothing to do with it. And then he immediately goes on to what really is important. He says, "But that the works of God should be made manifest in him." Now in the King James translation, you see there's a period there. You must understand that we're reading an English translation of something that was originally written in the Greek language. And I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of those original manuscripts that they translated the text from. It's just a string of Greek letters with no punctuation at all, and not even any spaces between the words in most cases. And so the punctuation is supplied by the translators. Now, I think this makes more sense if you take away the period there and maybe put in a comma, and if you read the next verse with it, now it makes sense. What this implies is, he said, "Neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him." The implication with the period is that, well, maybe God caused him to be born blind just so Jesus could come along and heal him. And I don't think God plays with our lives like a puppet master in that way. I don't think that's the way it is. That if he does, that's kind of a cruel way to deal with us poor human beings who have no say in this. I think a better way to understand this is to read the next verse along with it. So let's just say that the sentence starts with, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him, comma, I must work the works of him that sent me. Now, doesn't that make more sense? Jesus, what he's really saying is, you want to ask why it happened, but I don't want to talk about why it happened. That's not important. Why it happened doesn't matter. What matters is I'm here right now to do the works of him that sent me. Isn't that a better way to understand that? I think, Elliot, could you go back to verse 1 and give me the Message translation? I think the Message translation brings this out very clearly. Walking down the street, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. Okay? His disciples asked, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, causing him to be born blind? Next verse. Jesus said, you're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame. There's no such cause and effect here. Look instead for what God can do. Now, isn't that a good thought? See, I think as human beings, we have this natural propensity to try to figure out why things happened. Try to say, well, I must have done something wrong. If I hadn't done X, Y, and Z, maybe this thing wouldn't have happened. What Jesus is basically saying here, you're asking the wrong question. You're looking in the wrong direction. You see, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference why things happen. All that matters is here we are right now. Now, doesn't that kind of make a logical sense? See, what difference does it make what happened in the past? All that matters is here we are right now. And the big question is, what can God do? And Jesus says here, look instead for what God can do. He refuses, see, I kind of like this about Jesus. He refuses to point fingers. He refuses to accuse. He never accuses. He never points fingers. He never lays blame. He never says, well, you know what, if you would have done this and this and this, this wouldn't have happened. You know, people do that. And I just pray that you never have the same kind of experiences that we've had. You know, my wife, April, you know, and of course, Ellie and Anton, they know her. But several years ago, she had a little bout with colon cancer. And of course, that's very serious, as you know. And as you can see, she's fine now and got past that. But I'll tell you what happened, though, when she was in the middle of that. Relatives and people that I'd never seen before just started showing up with lots of good advice. And basically based on, now, if you had done like me, this wouldn't have happened. And I remember one relative brought this jar of, it looked like muck you got out of a swamp. It did. It looked like this mucky brown liquid. And she said, now, here, just drink this every day. Now, if you'd been drinking this before, this never would have happened. Well, you know, it's easy to say. It's easy to come along and tell other people what they ought to be doing. But I appreciate this about Jesus, that he doesn't do that. He doesn't say, well, you know what, if they'd done this and this, it wouldn't have happened. He just doesn't deal with it. The only thing he's concerned about is here we are right now. Here we are today, right now in the present moment. What can God do? And you see, that is a total change of perspective. And actually, as Christians, we should adopt that point of view. When I went to Bible school, April and I did, we went to Broken Arrows, a Bible school called Rhema Bible Training Center, and the man who founded it was still alive at that time, named Kenneth Hagin. And just before we graduated, he had this big meeting with all of us, and you know, some kind of like last minute advice, you know. And one of the things he said really stuck with me, and I've always remembered it to this day. He said, the Christian life cannot be lived looking backwards. Just don't look back anymore. Just think about here we are with God right now, and let's move forward. And I think that's what Jesus is saying here. You know, don't get stuck in this trap of thinking, well, if I had done things differently. Doesn't matter. Doesn't make any difference. Here we are right now. We're here today. What can God do? And I'll tell you what he can do. He can do anything. There's nothing too big for him. There's nothing he can't do. Nothing is impossible. No doors are closed to him. What happened in the past is gone and should be forgotten. And here we are today. I like the way he says, I'm just going to read it again. You're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame. And often we look at ourselves to blame. You shouldn't do that either. Doesn't make any difference. There's no such cause and effect here. Look instead for what God can do. And what God can do is anything. Every possibility is open to him. I think elsewhere in the New Testament, Jesus said, with God, nothing shall be impossible. That's his attitude about it. And I think that's a good attitude to have, don't you? It's a very optimistic attitude, a very positive looking attitude. And we've got reason for optimism. We've got reason to be positive because because of Jesus, because of his love for us, because of what he did for us, he's put us in connection with a God that loves us and cares about us. And Jesus here with this man, and he doesn't even know this man, this blind man, he just came across his path. And here he's here to make things better, not to make them worse. He's here to make things right. Now I'm going to go back to the King James translation, just finish reading this. Let's see, verse 4. He says, I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. And when he thus spoke, and he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle. Now this sounds very, sanctified in a way. Really, he just spit in the dirt and he stirred it around with his finger and made mud out of it. And then I'm sure they were all just kind of their mouths were hanging open because here they're talking to this blind man. They're having this serious theological discussion. Suddenly he spits on the ground. I'm sure they thought, what's going on now? And then he got down on the ground and started playing with it with his finger. And they're really kind of puzzled, I'm sure. And then to top it all off, he takes that mucky mud and he sticks it in the guy's eye. And, the blind man, he could have said, it's bad enough. I'm blind now. I got mud in my eye. And then he says, go wash it off. You ever think about that? Why did he tell him to go wash it off? That's what he said in verse 7. Go and wash in the pool of Siloam. That's interesting. Why didn't he just wave his magic wand and say, okay, now you can see? I think it's really interesting to kind of analyze his operation here. He stuck this mud in the guy's eye and he says, now go wash it off. I think, this is just my opinion because it doesn't say so specifically, I think his reason for doing that is he wanted the man himself to be a participant in a change of attitude. I think symbolically he is, in a sense, he's washing off what the cause of his pain and his problem was. He's, in a sense, washing it away, in a sense saying it's washed away and it's in the past now. And now it's a brand new life, it's a brand new today, and everything's different about it. But the main point I want to make from this is Jesus comes into our lives to make things better. Not to give us burdens, not to tell us things to do, not to make things hard, but to fix what's wrong and to make things better for us. Now here's another passage I want to read. This is in the same gospel, John's Gospel, chapter 16, and this is verse 33, John 16:33. This is at the end of Jesus' conversation with his disciples just before he went to the cross at this event we call the Last Supper, where he had a meal with them and he gave them last-minute instructions. And John's Gospel tells us all the things he said. The other Gospels don't. But John tells us all of this discussion that they have. And here he's concluding. These are the last things he says to them. The last verse here, verse 33, last thing he says, chapter 17 is a big long prayer, and then they take him away and he's taken to the cross. But this is his last words to his disciples. I think it's interesting. Verse 33, he says, these things I have spoken unto you, that you might have peace. I think that's good, by the way, that he wants us to have peace. We sang a song about that today. He wants you to be at rest in your heart and at peace. And, let's go on reading. These things I've spoken unto you, that in me you might have peace. So that's the goal here. He wants us to have peace on the inside. In the world, you shall have tribulation. The world means this physical world, of course, this, our physical lives in this physical world. And, by the way, tribulation there, it's just a word that means pressure. That's literally what it means. If you take that word and look it up, you can do that, by the way. With all these words, you can look them up in a concordance and find out what the original Greek word is behind it. And it is a Greek word thlipsis, Thlipis, S-I-S. I'm amazed that I can remember that. That just came to mind here. Thlipsis, and it literally means pressure, is literally what it means. And I think we can agree with that. I think we can all personally testify that that's true, that in life there is pressure. It's translated sometimes tribulation, sometimes it's translated trouble. And, if you're like me, I'd like it better if Jesus would say, now because you're a Christian, you'll never have any more trouble. That I'd like, I'd like that idea. We all like that idea. But he's not telling them, things that are untrue just to kind of, pacify their feelings at the moment. He's telling them how it really is. And he says, here's how it really is, disciples. In the world, you're going to have trouble. I'd like it better if we didn't. But the fact of it is, as long as you're in this physical life, as long as you're in this physical body, and by the way, you are not a physical body. You are a spirit living in a physical body. And these physical bodies are not going to last forever. Just everything in this world is in a state of change. I don't know if you ever thought about that or not. But I'll tell you something. The good news is the invisible world that you're also a part of it's an eternal world. It's not changing. It's not decaying. You don't have any difficulties in that world. But he says, as long as you're in this body, as long as you're in this world, as long as you're interacting with this physical world, the word that just popped in my mind just now is friction. There's always going to be friction. Now, we'd like it if there weren't, but there is. But he says, that's kind of a downer, to say there's tribulation in this world. But look at what he says next. But be of good cheer. I just want to double check, make sure that's what he says. Cheer up, in other words. He just got through saying, as long as you're in this world, there's going to be, to some degree or another, trouble. But be of good cheer. Cheer up. Now, you might be filled with fear about that. Oh, no, he just said I'm going to have trouble. But he's saying, no, don't be afraid. I want you to have peace. In fact, he even says, cheer up. You could imagine you might be able to have peace of mind, but be apprehensive. He's trying to say, look, just relax and cheer up because I've overcome the world. What he's saying is, whatever you face in this world that's a problem, you need to know that I'm bigger than that. You're putting your trust into Jesus, who is bigger than anything you face. Anything you face that's a problem is because it's in this world. A difficulty, a pressure, an obstacle. Anything that's you consider trouble or pressure or tribulation, you need to know that He is bigger than that. The person you're trusting in, the Savior that you're trusting in, He is bigger than that. And He says, I've spoken these things to you so that you can have peace. What that means is that we don't have to, first of all, we don't have to despair or feel sad or be worried or be concerned, because He cares about us. He cares about the things that confront us, and He's got a solution, just like with that blind man we read about before. I'm sure to that blind man, before Jesus came along, he must have felt like this is a dead-end situation. There's no way out. But there's nothing too hard for Jesus. When He comes into the picture, He comes to make things better. Now, in this case, in the sense of, in the context of us having trouble and problems and difficulties and things that cause us aggravation and, anything you want to put in that category, disappointments, frustrations, Jesus wants you to know He's come to make things better, to fix things, to set them right. Just like that blind man, that wasn't the end of the road for him, was it? That wasn't the end of the story. Jesus had a solution for him. And He didn't want him looking backwards, and He didn't want us looking backwards, and He doesn't want us looking forwards and being afraid. He wants us to put our trust in Him right here in this present tense and know that He hasn't come to make things worse, He's come to make things better. Now, I think the most plain spoken exposition of this is in the 11th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. And this is in verse 28. I just want you to in the light of what we've already read, read this with me in Matthew 11:28. This is Jesus speaking and saying to anyone who will listen to him. This is like an open invitation to anyone who will accept it. He says, "Come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Notice he doesn't say, "Come to me and I'll make it worse." I think sometimes, just judging by Christians, some things they say, I think sometimes people get that kind of attitude about it, that the Christian life is like one man heard, "It's hard," kind of like that. You got to put a waver in your voice. "Oh, it's hard." Well, that's not what it's supposed to be. He doesn't say, "Come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I'm going to make it hard." You may not make it. He doesn't say that. He says, "I'll give you rest." Now, I don't know how you want to define rest, but it's not hard and it's not work. In fact, what he's, if you read between the lines, you don't have to read between the lines very hard just to see this. He's saying that we accumulate burdens and he wants to take them away. And not only that, but if you think it's about work, it's not about work where your relationship with God is concerned. He says, "I'll give you rest." That reminds me, that kind of goes along with what we read earlier, where he said, "In the world you'll have trouble, but I've come to give you peace." Rest and peace. Those are good words, aren't they? Verse 28. I'm sorry, that's verse 28. 29. "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me." Yoke is, you've probably seen pictures of them. In agriculture back in the first century, they'd hook two animals together with a yoke, put it across their necks, and you get twice the horsepower, or oxen power, whatever they were. And all I can say is, thank goodness we don't have to do that today, because it's hard enough dealing with tractors and things. I mean, farming is hard enough. If I had to go out there every day, hook a bunch of animals together, I'd just probably throw up my hands and give up. But that's what they used to do. They hooked them together, and you get more pulling power. But I found this out from reading. Amazing what kind of things you can find out from reading about practices in the first century. And they had another use for the yoke in the first century that I think is interesting. On the farm where you're raising animals, there's animals being born all the time. New animals are coming online, so to speak. I'm sure they didn't use that terminology. So it's not like you just have this set of animals and that's it. There's new ones being born. And so what they would do, the practice was, when you had a young, let's say, an oxen or whatever, doesn't know how to do it. They've never worked in the field. They've never walked around that field. They don't know how the plow is pulled. So what they would do is they would take that yoke and they would take an animal who was big and strong and experienced and knew how to do it, knew where to go, knew how it worked. They would yoke him up with a novice, a young animal who didn't know anything about it. And so what would happen is the large, strong, big animal, when he took a step, it would force the other one to take a step too. He would learn how to walk. The big one was really pulling all the weight, you see. And the other one, because they're yoked together, is just walking along with him. And by so doing, he's learning how the walk is walked. Because the experienced animal is really, he's doing all the work. He's pulling all the weight. The other one is just kind of going along for the ride, or for the walk, if you want to say it that way. And I think that's what Jesus has in mind here when he says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me." See, that goes right. He says, in other words, get hooked up with me and start learning from me. That's what he's saying. Learn of me. And then first thing he says, here's the first thing you're going to find out about him. "I am meek and lowly in heart." That means he gets right down on our level. He doesn't act superior. He doesn't wag his finger in your face and says, "Well, here's what you should have been doing. Here's what if you hadn't done that," that like that story we read before. He's not like that. He's meek, lowly in heart, and he says, "You will find rest for your souls." Isn't that a good thought? Yeah, I think that's good. When we're hooked up with him, he comes to make things better. He comes to give us rest. What we learn from him is he's sympathetic. He cares about us. He cares about all the things that concern us. He's concerned with those same things. and He'll give us rest for our souls. Verse 30. I just love this. This is one of my favorite verses. If you are the kind of person that underlines things in your Bible, this would be a good one to underline. What I started to say is, again, I got this from Kenneth Hagin. He used to say this too. He said, if your Bible is so holy that you can't underline things in it, throw it away and get one less holy so you can. And underline this. That's what he said. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now in the context, the yoke represents our being hooked up with Him, doesn't it? It represents really our Christian life. So I say, if your Christian life isn't easy, then maybe you need to re-examine what you're thinking about it. He says, my yoke is easy. Did he say easy? Yeah, he didn't say hard, he said easy. It's not a burden, it's not difficult. He said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Easy and light. Aren't those good words? I like the idea that what he's saying is, your Christian experience, if you understand it properly, should be easy and light. Because just like that analogy I gave you before, He's pulling all the weight. He's pulling the load. But the main thing I wanted to get at here is He comes to make things better, not to make them worse. Now, I never like to read this passage without also reading the Message translation, which I really, really like, in verse 28. Elliot, could you go back? Yeah, there we go. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? You know what I like about that is this reminds me of one of those TV commercials. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? And I could look at that, think about that and say, yeah, you know what? I guess I could say I am. Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. That's a good thought, isn't it? Recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. I just love the fact that what Jesus is saying He's interested in is us having peace of mind, a sense of rest about us, not anxious, not full of fear or worry or anxiety in any way, peace of mind. Okay, let's get the next one. This is good. Walk with me. Work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. It's not forced. It's not artificial. It's not phony. He says, learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. I like that too. That's a good thought. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. You know, the thing about it is, the Christian life is not a cookie-cutter thing where your life has to be conformed to some sort of artificial standard where He's just stamping out replicas of some, everybody has to look alike and everybody's got to talk alike and everybody's got to do the same thing. No, it's not like that at all. It's specifically tailored to you as an individual. He cares about you and me as individuals. And He says, I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. You know, I can remember when I was a teenager going to church, and, missionaries would come along and talk about all their... Really, it was just like a horror story of all these terrible things they endured, And I used to think to myself, I got to be careful here. If I get too close to this God, He's going to make me do something. I got the impression that what God's all about is make you do the thing that's least suited to you. I thought, He's liable to make me go to some faraway country, and, some jungle in Africa where they eat ants and, and sit in the mud and, it just seemed horrifying to me, And I'm sure there are people who do, go to places like that who love it, and it's, perfectly suitable to them. What never occurred to me is that instead of being like vindictive or mean, He might have in mind a Christian life that was perfectly suited to me, like putting a hand inside of a glove, perfectly tailored to who we are as individuals. And I think that's what Jesus is saying here. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you in your life, because He knows us as individuals. He cares about the things that concern us. Let's get the next verse. Keep company with me, and you'll learn how to live freely and lightly. Isn't that a good thought? Did you ever thought to yourself, this thought ever crossed your mind? The Christian life is a life that can be free and light. And I think that's what He means for it to be. Well, you know what? If you've got the right perspective on it, that it's really His life, and that He's come alongside to help us. That's the main point I want to get across today is He comes into our lives to help. to make things better. And we don't have to analyze how we got to where we are right now at this very moment today. Just this very second, this very moment today, everything that happened in the past, you should just kiss it goodbye and say it doesn't make any difference. Here we are right now in this moment with a God that loves us, that cares about us, for whom nothing is too hard, for whom nothing is too difficult. And what he's basically saying is, you know, sure, there's problems, there's difficulties you have to confront, but cheer up. I'm bigger than the world. I'm bigger than anything you face. And he's come into our lives to help, to make things better. Okay, I think that's all I got today. Let's all stand up.